councillors and Hamish and staff. Got our first submitter. Welcome, Donna. Who'd like to come forward and give your submission on behalf of the Citizens Association.
Morena, good morning, Councillor Wilson, and thank you very much for the warm welcome. Yes, I'm speaking today on behalf of the Ashburton Citizens Association, and I'll take the written submission as read. I have in the last couple of days been out taking photographs to talk about item 1.A, standardising the crossing blocks. So there are around our district on your network a number of crossings that I wouldn't actually think meet the criteria of what you expect. This is a wooden crossing which is on your network. Here we have a concrete block which is placed in the gutter. Steel crossings, more concrete blocks. These vehicle crossings are increasing around the township, and when the stormwater flows, it gets funneled into a very narrow gap. These steel crossings are actually bolted to your footpath. So the Ashburton Citizens Association request standardising the crossing blocks, and one example we've given under 1.A is Dunedin City Council have some very clear instructions on their website. The Citizens Association would also like to see Council have more stormwater grates to catch litter and stormwater contaminants. As rainfall patterns increase, ensure that the stormwater network is fit for purpose. And one example I give later in the submission is directly outside our business at the Regent Cinema and the event centre. These are the very small grates that were installed, which catches quite a lot of rain. Now I must make a correction. Under 7.A, I said moderate rainfall storm occurs and it causes flooding. I'll change that to heavy. These are the grates that were installed. This is the outpipe that flows into the gutter, and you'll see there's some silt there, and that was due to the clean that happened in July 21 after 8 years of being in place. A lot of silt went into the deep gutters, and it hasn't been cleaned out, predominantly I think because cars are parking along Cass Street. This was the clean that happened in January 21 after 8 or 9 years of being in place. There was organic material that had collected in there and weeds were growing in. I put in the submission that it took 4 or 5 trailers to actually get rid of all of the organic material, and I think somehow it had slipped off the cleaning process. And this is the silt that's gathering around in the deep gutters just around the corner. So the Citizens Association requests that penalties be introduced for non-compliant driveways. I've talked about the guttering outside the cinema and event centre. The bylaw is silent on reducing the flow of stormwater into the system, and we did read Anthony White's submission with interest and concur that encouraging rainwater collection on property would be useful to reduce the amount of stormwater going into the system. We talked about Jeff Gehring Drive and the fact that there had been a sustainability clause when that development was made, and we encouraged that through council to new developments. Deep gutters to be covered. So this is actually one of the gutters I referred to under 7.E, that there is a health and safety issue. And I gave 2 examples. One was a mobility scooter, and many are getting out of their vehicles because they have poor eyesight. That poor eyesight also means they can't see when there is a deep gutter as opposed to a flat gutter or a low gutter. So sadly we witnessed one day a lady went over this deep gutter, landed face first on the road with her mobility scooter atop of her, and St John Ambulance had to come and collect her. And then more recently I gave the example where the police came looking for a victim of a an apparent hit and run, only to discover he was in fact intoxicated and had tripped over that gutter at night because there is poor lighting. But he fell onto that road 2, if not 3 times during that CCTV footage. Then go on to talk about the overall maintenance of the stormwater system. And this is an illustration of the stormwater channels at the Ashburton Domain. So while we refer to the domain as the jewel in the crown of Ashburton, unfortunately the throne is crumbling around her. Then I've given a link to Auckland Council, which has announced the scrapping of the resource consents for installation of rainwater tanks on residential properties. And while I understand that that could be a long-term fix, it is definitely something to think about. The reason I've put this sign up is Ashburton District Council and ANZ successfully collaborated on the Business of the Year 2022. And ANZ now have good energy home loans, one category of which includes sustainable water upgrades. So while I congratulate Council on a triple win for businesses, ANZ and Council on promoting businesses, I also encourage that some consideration be given to collaborating with ANZ on encouraging properties to embrace sustainable water upgrades. Number 8, which is right at the very last page of the submission. Do you have any other comments on the draft bylaw? Some time ago, Council changed the footpath seal to reduce the non-permeable surfaces and include grass. And that was about making sure that more stormwater went into the underground water system. That doesn't seem to have continued rolling out, or I'm not sure where that's at, but just thought we'd mention that that was a good step in reducing the amount of water going into the stormwater system. In closing, the Ashburton Citizens Association wished to thank the Council for the shift to closing the submissions to Sunday at 5 o'clock. It was greatly appreciated, and for the opportunity to speak to the submission. Could we also take this opportunity, as it is the last public consultation before the end of term, to thank all of the councillors who have served this term, and in particular to Councillor Mackay, Councillor Rawlinson, Councillor Falloon and Councillor Wilson, who have indicated they will be leaving. Your service has been greatly appreciated by the community. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Donna. Any questions from councillors? Quite a thorough submission, Donna. You went through very well. Any questions?
Sure.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Donna, for your submission. Well done. It's a good submission. The vehicle crosser or roading, we'll follow that up as to where they should sit, and that it doesn't look a good look, I know. Thanks for those photographs. The ANZ home loans ones, thanks for bringing that up. I wasn't aware of that. It's been something I've been sort of passionate of for some time, is for homeowners to collect their rainwater and use it at a later date for watering their garden. So been beavering away at that, so here's another prompt to keep that going, so thanks for that. Thinking about the fellow that fell over on the gutter because of poor lighting in the gutter. I'm not sure whether the gutter and the lighting was the main cause of him falling over, but it certainly assisted. If the gutter was right and the lighting was good, he possibly would have still fallen over on something else. And also take note of the person who was in the mobility scooter, but it's like anyone who uses those things, you need to be aware of where you're going. Yeah.
So
thanks for your submission.
Thank you for the comments. In regards to the ANZ, this submission actually prompted me to investigate what is available, and interesting, there is $80,000 per household, where you can actually go and apply for funds at a 1% loan. It's got 3 years to pay it back, but it would be a wonderful collaboration for council and for the ANZ, and I think there is a real win out there for the community. There was one example of a fall that I forgot about until I was rereading this, and it was an older gentleman, and again, there is no street lighting from our corner until the rear of the car park at the event centre, and even that lighting is actually in the car park. It's probably just past the car park, to be honest, but it is poor lighting down that side. And we did have an older gentleman who fell and ended up hospitalised as well, and I'm not sure if it was because of the deep gutters, but it is the first part of the streetscape where you get the deep gutters. So you've got the CBD, we're technically just on the outskirts at the outer CBD, and it is the first deep gutter. So people, I don't think, are ready for the transition.
No, I think as the roads are upgraded, the roads and whatever, then the guttering all gets redone at the same time. So footpaths, etc. So it's in a program. You obviously know you can't do the whole lot in one go, but little steps and you'll get there. So thanks for raising that with us too.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Donna, just what we're seeing there, rainwater tanks, and then connected to indoor plumbing system, so that water comes off a roof. It's not getting purified.
I am no expert on on rainwater tanks. However, what I have seen, it looks as though there are different systems. The rainwater Auckland City Council video that they have introducing rainwater systems talks about thinking about what you want to use the water for, and they don't encourage it to be drinking water, but they do encourage it to perhaps wash your clothes or perhaps be used on the garden. So yes. Yeah.
The trouble I have, like myself, I've got a system, 30,000 litres.
Right.
It will be full this time, but when I need it at summertime, I don't have any water. So I like the ideas, but I'm not convinced that it's the best way of doing it. It works in places where there's a lot of rainfall the whole year. Here it doesn't seem to work. And I tried it for 10 years.
So our submission is focused on the stormwater system and trying to divert. Yeah.
Councillor Mackay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Donna.
Morning.
Thank you for those few words. Don't know whether I deserve them, but on your page 4, I think you have a nice photograph of a rainwater tank. But there's a sentence just above it that has me tickled pink, if that's all right. And it's got in there, with a price incentive of lower water supply charges. How does that fit in this town of Ashburton?
So I took that example from Auckland, and to be honest, long-term water solutions are up in the air. So I guess it's about preparedness, and one imagines that what is happening in Auckland is probably going to be what is happening in the wider country. To be honest, this is straight off the Auckland Council website.
So it's a cut and paste, but it's here in your submission. So
yes, it is.
I'm going to continue, if I may, Mr. Chairman. So in this council's putting the meters in, this council has said there'll be no charges for water. Are you indicating by putting this in, cut and paste, that you would like water charges in the Ashburton town?
No, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that as Three Waters is progressing and it is merely crystal ball gazing, one can only speculate on what is on the horizon. So purely this information was put in there directly from Auckland as an example of what is happening there. But I have the radar up that this may well be on the horizon at some stage, and while water is under the control of council, council can maintain its promise. When water is not, it may not be able to uphold that promise.
You quoted Jeff Gearing Drive as
Yes, I did.
as an
Yep.
example. In your considered opinion, what percentage of those houses would be actually using the systems that council asked them to put in before they could build a house there, seeing the sections were cheaper at the time?
I know in the very early day there seemed to be a great embrace of that. Based on the current requirements, I have no idea. I have not seen the data on what that would be, but I think that would be a very good exercise for council to investigate if that was possible.
Thank you.
Further questions? Only comment I would make about storing rainwater, if Three Waters does go ahead and consumer, ratepayers will be allocated less and less water, it will become economically plausible to put in a tank to collect your stormwater. So, like a lot of things, economics dictates what people do. Yes, Councillor Mackay?
So, while hearing the submissions and listening to the submissions and trying to fledge out the submissions, are we actually allowed to make comment as councillors now, are we?
No, not yet.
Thank you.
Just Chair, I thought I'd better say something.
Councillor Wilson, can I say your mere presence is influence enough?
Thank you very much. On that note, thank you very much for your submission, Donna.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's usually thorough and you did as usual. Thank you.
I don't know how to do that. Okay, thank you.
Now ask Grant Smith to come forward for your submission, please. You just
How you going? Oh, hang on. Okay, get that. Microphone's on. So that's on?
It's on.
Yep. I forgot my hearing aids, so you fellas, if you want to question me, speak loud.
if you look at page 17, councillors, of the submission booklet.
Let's see. What's that to do with me? Can I start? You're
Yes, yes, fine.
right? Okay, stormwater to me is, you know, ECAN has, for a long time had, that the discharge of all the stormwater has to be retained on the property via soak pits, whatever. It's not just water that goes into them. That's one of the problems that you guys are obviously looking at. So I don't know what you got planned, but whether this stuff gets piped from now on and stored and cleaned before it goes anywhere into the groundwater or into the river, that's up to you, and that's going to be a massive cost and a massive change of direction if it happens. But at the moment, it's all coming into the groundwater, okay, and coming down, because we live below the town, coming down onto us. I got a history of well tests here from 1995 to now. Our nitrate levels are still climbing. There was a big fuss about it in 2007. Council tried to blame the abattoir for our area on what was going on with the groundwater, and the council actually owned it previous to that. They were using it as dumping holes for carcasses and all sorts of things. That hasn't cleaned up at all, and that's been stopped for 20 years now. The water quality is still going. I got a nitrate test here. What's the date? August this year, and we're sitting at 11 on our nitrates. In 1995 it was 4, and supposedly we're meant to be going down, okay, with the abattoir taking the stuff away. I firmly believe it's the cemetery, okay, that's going in there. I came here in 2008 when we had the council had a massive plastic problem. They couldn't get rid of their waste from the recycling outfit. Suggest they turned it into coffins and put it in the ground. So if it's going in the ground, there's no problem, no leakage, no anything. They looked at me like I was stupid. which probably am, but that's, okay, that was a suggestion. So what's happening now is I missed the submissions when you guys extended the cemetery, and I realise this isn't stormwater, but it's water quality I'm talking here. We're away overseas, and I actually asked the council to let me know when they were applying it, but they didn't, so I didn't get to make a submission on it. But, as I say, what's happening with our place and why I'm on with this is we have to supply a water quality test to be GAP eligible to supply the supermarkets in the south, well, in New Zealand. Okay, so I'm presenting water quality tests from our deep well. Okay, these tests are from our shallow well, and we are passing at the moment. But eventually, if this keeps climbing and this shit keeps coming down onto us, we're not even going to be able to irrigate. And my business is gone, which is nothing to do with anything I've done. And that will possibly happen, maybe not in my time, but in my family's time. So that's why I want you guys to look at this, is basically what you're doing is shitting in our water, and it just keeps coming. I've made this submission 25 years ago and again at about 16 years ago, but it was in the too hard basket. Yeah, I realise we're on the way to town water, which will certainly help, but it won't help with our irrigation going forward. So that's about where I sit. Yeah, we have been, as I say, the water quality with runoff. I've got houses in Netherby above us, and the guys' cars drip oil. I realise the new policy has got traps. I think it hasn't it, oil traps before it goes into the soak pits, but it's still all the other runoff, bird shit off the roofs. So everything is going down, and it's massive coming out of town. So that's where we sit. So you, with the rivers and the quality, you guys are obliged to clean them up and annoy the cockies with their nitrate levels and all the rest of it. But we've still got to look at what we're in town. Everybody's pointing out there. If everybody in town looks at what they're doing, we can probably clean the whole thing up. But it'll be a big cost. And whether you guys have got the money or I don't know whether that's ever going to happen. Okay, that's all I got to say.
Thank you. Got any some questions? Councillor Falloon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You say the groundwater pollution is coming from the dead centre.
I think most of it.
Is there any research which has been done overseas to show that dead centres do lead to increasing nitrate levels in the groundwaters below them? Are you aware of any?
Well, one of the early meetings we had on the nitrate levels, you guys had an expert there at the meeting, and my question was, where in the world, to him, where in the world do you think water quality around a cemetery would be any good? He said, nowhere. That was, and you guys will have a history of what his name was and who he was if you need to talk to him. But that was his answer. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Stuart, and thanks, Grant, for your submission. A couple of points I'd like to raise. To collect and treat all the stormwater that's out there would be a huge cost for the volume of the water.
Yeah.
And if you suggest that council pays for it, council only gets its money from one person or one set of persons, which is ourselves, the ratepayers.
Yeah.
Could we afford it? I don't know. We'd have to do those numbers, but I'd think it, as you mentioned, it wouldn't be cheap. There's disposal of carcasses. Could you just flesh that out a wee bit more? What happened years ago and what's happening today?
Well, the abattoir originally just dug holes and put all their offal waste, massive holes they had out on the property there. They had a digger out there everywhere if you go all over that property. And that's to be fair, I don't think is impinging on our tests. I think the water flow, they seem to think it goes on the angle, but I don't think it does. That was when the council owned the abattoir. After they on-sold it, things changed. ECAN got into them. They shut those down, and now all the offal's taken away, but they still do spread their blood and stuff on that top paddock over the road from the abattoir, which I assume they're under an ECAN resource consent, and that's tested and followed up. I'm not sure as to how much is going on, or yeah.
Yeah, I think it's yes to those two questions. Yes, they are. ECAN do look after it, and yes, they do follow up on it. The other thing, your business, what's your business that you're running?
I grow raspberries.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And do you use fertiliser on them? Fertiliser?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Any nitrogen?
A wee bit, yeah. Yeah. Same as everyone, but we're under our allocation of what we should be, way under, yeah.
Yep. And you talked about in the drinking water, in your well, it's 11 parts per million, which is...
on this latest test, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, that's
yeah, plus the E. coli levels are going up and down as well. I'm not saying that's related to the cemetery. It could be a wee bit of wellhead cover, because they do, they've been as high as 18 at some stages. But that's a council policy where all the way down the road they put septic tanks and wells in most of the houses, so they're in a line. So my neighbour's septic tank's in line with my shallow well, so I've been drinking his stuff we filtered it for a long time, but it's not showing in our deep well. But my worry is if we keep going with these levels the way they're going, it will start to show.
Yeah, and you mentioned about the rivers, and we don't look after the rivers. Environment Canada looks after them, regulatory-wise. We all should look after them individually, but regulatory-wise, he can look after that. And he can look after the septic tanks out there as well. They've deemed it to be a problem, and they've said no more septic tanks out there, as you'll be aware of, I think.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of discussion where people think that they should still be allowed to put septic tanks in. I dare say you'd be the opposite.
Well, the modern ones are a lot different to what we put in our day. They help a lot.
I'd assume that you wouldn't want to upgrade your septic tank to a modern one.
Not really.
No. There's our problem.
Yeah.
Well, it's more ECAN's problem, really. It's in our district, and but he can look after that side of things. But thanks very much for the clarifications, all those things. It's good. Thanks, and thanks for your submission. Well done.
Okay. Thank you.
Hang on, another question.
Sorry.
Councillor Latham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Grant, you said in your shallow well, the nitrate level has risen from 4 to 11 since 1995.
Yeah, it does. There's a whole history here.
Yeah.
And some tests are down and some are up.
Yeah.
And maybe the nitrate levels have been flushed a wee bit with the amount of water we've had in the winter, but this test was done, latest test was done in August.
Yeah,
So,
I understand that. Have you done any tests in your deep well?
yeah, we get one a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where is that?
Oh, it's low.
Okay.
Yeah, nitrate wise, and
Okay. What depth is your deep well?
40 metres.
40 metres. Oh,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Okay. And your shallow well?
It was one of the old 30 feet, 9.1 metres, I think.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, look, thank you very much. I just wanted to clarify that in my mind.
Yeah, I can leave these tests for you to look at. I don't.
No, I'll take your word for it, Grant.
Yeah,
I've got no problem.
yeah. Or
Yeah.
well, I'll leave one, and then if anybody's interested, they can have a look at it at the test record, because it is a monitor well, so it'll give you an indication of what's. You probably have that available to you there. But if you go on the ECAN website and bring up that well, it'll show you.
Very good. If you leave it, it gives us a summary on your particular well. Got another question from Councillor Mackay.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Grant. And if I can, Mr. Chairman, thank Grant for bringing factual test data to the table. It's very good to actually have the factual stuff instead of conjecture. But just following up on a question that my friend the Mayor asked Grant about septic tanks. And are you actually waiting for the council, instead of spending money to upgrade your tank, you're actually waiting for the council to do something in that area that you're in, are you?
Yeah, we are really. We've waited a long time.
Would you explain a bit further, please?
Well, just because of the water quality, really, at the shallow wells, particularly, it's it just not drinkable, really. That's why we had to go to a deeper well. But my worry is that we're on the bottom end of the town, so go right across the town, and I know where it's all heading. To our place, if you're on the top end of the town, you're pretty good. I've talked about this 3 or 4 times to the council about getting town water down there that's tested. But you've got wells in Bridge Street as well, and I think are they 70 metres? They're pretty deep. So over a period of time, that could impinge on your own setup. But I think it takes a long time. What people don't realise is this amount of water we've had through the winter. If you go down to the Wakanui beach at the moment, there's water just running out of the shingle there. And that's possibly a good thing because it's moving the nitrates as it goes, but in the shallow wells, it's probably not. Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you.
I'll leave these here.
Hang on, you got another question from Angus. You turned your light. You finished?
It's just after Angus's question, Grant, if there was a sewer connection going past your property, but you have a septic tank, would you connect to a sewer connection?
Yeah, would. Yeah.
Would if it was there?
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, I think most people down there would.
And retire their septic tanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good, thank you.
No further question. Thank you very much, Grant, for your submission.
Okay.
And if you leave that's
I'll leave
very
those.
good.
You can do it.
Okay, thanks very much. You turn it off, yeah. public. Welcome back, councillors, Mr Mayor and councillors and staff. We'll now go through the document of feedback. We've heard the two people that wanted to be heard. Now we'll go through. We won't actually debate what we're going to do at this stage. We'll go through and the staff will lead us on the the general feedback over the whole. I presume everybody's read it, so we'll hand it over to Richard and Andy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My expectation at this stage was that this was your opportunity, if you wished, to look at the written submissions, the other 5 submissions from people who have put things in writing but have not asked to appear. However, happy to just walk you through the, we've got a presentation actually which then enables us to work through section by section the submissions that we've had. So maybe we'll just roll with that.
I think we did the summary of the feedback. Everybody should have read all the submissions.
Yep.
Rather than go through every submission individually. You've done a good summary there.
Yep.
So,
well, I'll use this presentation because it'll help us walk through that. My plan for this deliberation was to begin with just an overview of a couple of key messages and then working through the issues that were raised in those written submissions and then talking about our responses and any recommendations. So one of the features of the submissions that we've had on the bylaw is that they've raised a number of issues relating to stormwater, but not so much related to a stormwater bylaw. So we've got some really interesting feedback, but not a great deal of matters to deliberate upon today in terms of adopting or amending a bylaw. So the purpose of a bylaw, it's a regulatory instrument, and the purpose of this bylaw is to help us operate and enforce our stormwater discharge resource consent. And when you're operating a stormwater system, you have a variety of tools in your toolbox, and a bylaw is a regulatory instrument. It's a stick, it's not a carrot. And I'm talking for a moment about sticks and carrots because a number of people have made some really useful suggestions through their submissions about things that council might do to help incentivise people to invest in grey water systems or rainwater collection. And those are what I would tend to categorise as carrots rather than sticks. And today our focus isn't so much growing carrots as designing a nice efficient stick. When we're talking about bylaws, the characteristic of good bylaws and good regulation is that they're clear and that they're fit for purpose. And the other important message around this particular bylaw is that our scope is urban Ashburton, including Phaeton, urban Rakaia and urban Methven. You heard Mr. Smith make a very good point that many agricultural producers in this district are having to deal with their water discharges, and that this is kind of turnabout and fair play for urban people. Our current resource consent applies to urban Ashburton, and Mr. Guthrie and his team are working through the process of obtaining consents for stormwater discharge for Rakaia and Methven. And when those come in, then this bylaw will become relevant in those communities too. The first set of issues related to the section of the bylaw about protecting the stormwater network. I want to assure you that in the course of this presentation we will cover all parts of the bylaw. This is the material in the summary of feedback on pages 4 and 5. We had, I've noted these issues that were raised. The submission from Mr. Smith that the council should be controlling all discharge with none going to groundwater. We had a submission from Mr. White who disagreed with the description of the options in the consultation document. We had submissions from more than one submitter asking us to make sure we keep our maintenance up, to make the network fit for purpose. We certainly had a well-illustrated submission from the Ashburton Citizens Association talking about the standardisation of vehicle crossings. 71% of submitters, which is 5 of the 7 submitters, indicated support for these parts, for this part of the bylaw. And those 4 points on the slide that I've got a red asterisk alongside, where we would broadly agree with the comments from the submitter, and we've often added some explanation around those things.
I've just got a question from the Mayor.
Yes.
Yeah, just going back to Mr. White's submission, he talks about the options 1 and 2, and in the booklet, the option is option 1 is adopt the proposed bylaw, and option 2 is adopt the proposed bylaw. What's the difference between? They're the same. That's his point, I think.
There's a
The
typo.
one's preferred and one's not, but they're both the same. Please tell me how they're different.
Those options were drawn from the original paper that went to council to commence the consultation. And in the original paper, option 2 was to do more work on the bylaw before taking it out for consultation. Unfortunately, in transposing it into the consultation document, we didn't get the wording right, and so it looks like option 1 and 2 are identical. So I apologise for that. Because it was transposed from a previous report, we've put more effort into proofreading the new words than the words that we knew had already been proofread, and we missed that. I didn't spot it myself until I was reviewing Mr. White's submission.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, you're right, you can carry on.
Okay. If there's no further questions on that part, I'll move on to the next section. And this is page 6 of the summary of feedback. And the issue here was in a submission from Mr. Lawrenson on behalf of the fuel companies, noting that they would like opportunities for input into stormwater quality standards. So the bylaw gives council the power at a future point to define quality standards for stormwater discharge into its network. Our response to that submission is that we would fully intend to enable anybody who wanted input into that decision to do so. And my advice to council is that when you want to annoy people, do not annoy people that are really wealthy like fuel companies, because they are particularly difficult people when they're annoyed. I had the pleasure of working for Waitaki, and before I arrived, Waitaki had a rating issue, and it sat down with, I think it was then Electrical, Meridian Energy, and we worked out, well, they worked out a resolution that worked for both parties. The council on the other side of the river litigated. So I guess you can imagine how the litigation went. So happy to talk with the fuel companies and anyone else, I don't think we're about to launch into any work on stormwater quality standards in the short term, but when we do, we need to talk to the people that are concerned. Was there anything in the submissions around discharge applications that people wanted to talk about? If not, we'll move to the next slide.
Councillor Cameron, you got the comment?
Yeah, I've got a general comment. The stormwater say out here, is it tested for contaminants and things on a regular basis? Do we test our stormwater?
Yeah, so we have a monitoring program laid down as part of our consent application. So we're currently doing monthly testing at multiple sites around the urban area, and the initial work for that, the original purpose for that work is to create a baseline. So it's basically trying to understand what the starting conditions are.
Okay.
And then at some point we'll have to negotiate with ECAN some improvement path.
So to get your consent, you're going to have to show we have this, our current standard of our stormwater is this. We need a consent to at least this level because, and we're going to try and mitigate any ongoing increases. Is that?
Yeah, well, they've given us the consent with prior to us doing the monitoring program.
Yeah.
But it had to be established within 2 years of granting the consent.
And have you found anything that was worrisome in our storm?
To be honest, I haven't heard, and I'm sure the boys would have mentioned it to me if there was something of, out of the ordinary. But again, a lot of these things aren't, you can't tell a lot from 1 or 2 samples.
No.
You need that trend.
Yeah. You get someone changing the oil in the car or, in the back section, you wouldn't know what people are putting down the stormwater really, would you? Yeah,
so the primary monitoring we're doing at the moment relates to groundwater and basically the receiving environment. So we're testing the waterways.
What goes out from the stormwater out to the
Yeah, so we're trying to understand what the impact of that network is having on the receiving environment.
Okay, and I have one more question, and Richard, this is through the chair, probably for you. Fuel companies, Mark Lawrenson did a submission. Officers note the statements regarding the guidelines. Officers will need to demonstrate compliance with council stormwater discharge. Is that you? Is that our ADC officers demonstrating to ECAN that we're meeting their discharge resource consent, or what are you talking about there? Or is that their officers? Page 8 on the right.
Yep, that's our officers demonstrating to ECAN that we're complying with the terms.
So regardless of what the fuel companies say, we still have to meet our conditions and we have to demonstrate that. So whatever makes it, Right, thank you.
Well, you're right, Richard.
Mm-hmm. The next set of issues were around proposals to manage discharge from non-residential sites, and together with Earthworks, this is probably where the rubber will eventually start to meet the road for local businesses. This is where most of our work we anticipate might come. The submitters encouraged us to keep compliance costs low for business. Fuel company noted that good practice is well established for petrol industry sites. They also asked that risk classification, which is probably the next substantive piece of policy work related to the stormwater issue, that when we do that work on risk classification, that we take into account the view of fuel companies. They also sought an amendment to clause 7.2.2. And the same 5 out of 7 submitters were supportive of the proposals around managing discharge from non-residential site, but due to rounding and how the people who did not support it were split, the 71% became 72% under the Microsoft graph calculation methodology. And on the next slide, I have a draft resolution about amending clause 7.2.2. And I'm about to suggest that we don't amend clause 7.2.2 after a discussion with Mr. Guthrie. I'll just take you through it. The fuel companies, and this is at the bottom of page 9, and it goes over to page 10, on the left-hand column of the table, had suggested some amendments to clause 7.2.2. And this was about the information to be provided when providing a stormwater protection plan, which is a plan showing how the operator of a site will manage their stormwater. And the fuel companies made a number of points which are probably true of a typical petrol station. So our initial thought was that the request to remove reference to wastewater was probably a reasonable thing, and that the rest of it we wouldn't agree with, because we have other kinds of industrial sites where the wording actually is more inclusive. It wouldn't penalise fuel company or petrol station sites in any way, but it might limit our ability to cover all of the non-residential sites that we would hope to have within the scope of the bylaw. This morning, talking with Mr. Guthrie, he said he had reflected on the question of whether we should, in a stormwater protection plan, get information on the wastewater system, and made the very valid point that sometimes people end up with stormwater in their wastewater system, either by accident or design, and that actually capturing that information on the wastewater system, where the wastewater system is, gives council a very quick indication of whether there's any potential issues with stormwater going into the wastewater system. And so on the strength of Andy's more considered view, I wouldn't recommend any amendment to clause 7.2.2. I think we stick with the words that we've got.
Yes, I've got a question while you're on that. Older residents, did some of them put their stormwater off the house into the sewerage system? That was the way it worked, I think, didn't it, in years past? But we've done our best to separate it.
My understanding was most stormwater went to ground or to the street curb in the older parts of Ashburton. But some people, if they couldn't get a good soak pit dug, would direct it to the stormwater, to the sewer network. I don't think there was any intention that they should, but it did happen.
Doesn't our discharge at Wilkins Road, with this rain, the discharge seems to increase? That must indicate that there's stormwater getting into the wastewater.
Yeah, so it's a combination of inflow and infiltration. So we've still got a lot of old pipes which are leaking groundwater into the system. And also inflow is where we have the lower gully traps. Now that issue has been largely addressed in Timwood, which was our hotspot.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, just on that stormwater getting into the wastewater, there was a project undertaken 5 years, or it could be a bit more ago, called The Right Pipe. There was to fix all that and take it all out. So where did that get to? And I understood it was completed and shouldn't be happening, apart from the old pipes.
Yeah, so like I say, the hotspot for that issue was Timwood.
Yep.
And Timwood was done, excuse me, and then the project got, it carried on onto the northern side of Ellington, and we started down this side of town. But yeah, we ran out of resource basically, and we were starting to not see any advantages through it. The inspections weren't showing the same level of problems. So it was sort of, we were not getting diminishing returns, if you follow.
Yep, thanks.
Hello, Richard.
Sorry, just to pick up on that. So the Tinwald area was largely complete. That was the area that was the main focus, and that was completed, and then we did other areas. So we don't believe it's necessary to carry on with that. And yeah, there was certainly a lot in Tinwald of the gully traps that needed to be fixed, and that was quite a big process at the time. But that's all complete now.
Councillor Mackay?
If I could just follow up, Mr. Chairman, on Mr. Guthrie's comment, ran out of resource diminishing. So who made that decision to stop that right pipe project? Was it council or was it chief executive or staff?
It was probably a decision, a management decision.
So if I've got it right, council brought a policy in of getting stormwater sewage in the right pipe. Is that right?
The right pipe project was primarily focused on Tynwald at the time. And we made the decision, a management decision, to continue it into Ashburton to see what it looked like.
Which is a good decision, yes.
And then when we weren't finding the same level of issues in Allenton and beyond, Borough, we decided to pull the pin.
Was the council, if I may, was the council informed of that decision at the time on its policy?
I don't believe there was a single report to it, but I'm sure it came through activity reporting.
Yeah, at the time we had committee meetings, and it was reported in the committee meetings. It was a decision made at the time that the benefit and cost was suggesting it wasn't worth continuing in other areas in Ashburton.
Okay.
We can find that reference if you're interested.
It was in a committee.
Yes. Yeah.
Councillor Bloom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Coming back to clause 7.22, the petrol companies have put up a submission where they're deleting and adding to that 7.22. Council's intention is not to change it at all, but did I hear you correctly saying that the reference to wastewater drainage would be removed or not?
What I said was that on first reading, we thought that the wastewater reference should be removed, but on reflection, we actually think it should remain.
Yeah, perhaps I'll take that. So the issue from our point of view, this is data capture, so we're just asking for a plan to be submitted. What we're concerned is that if somebody was giving us information on their stormwater system, it would be pertinent to us to know what they are doing or where their wastewater network is going on property, just to effectively help us understand whether or not they are potentially surreptitiously directing their stormwater problem to the wastewater network. So it's just giving us more information on which to assess these applications.
Councillor Cameron?
Are we on section 6 and section 7 now? Can I ask questions about that? Or shall I wait?
Are you on section 7?
We're on section 7, okay. When we've got these discharges from non-residential sites, and the people are required, owners are required to say what they're doing, you know, if they've got a manufacturing business or whatever, then they may be required to submit a report, a stormwater protection plan, which the council may or may not review, or may review and approve. Who's going to do all that reviewing and approving, and how many plans do you expect, and are they all got to come in before a certain date? How is that going to be managed?
So we've got resourcing set aside for this role, for this work. It will be largely governed by our risk assessment work and when we drive that. So the load, if you like, is going to be driven by officers. So it's not like we'll be, I don't think we're going to get a flood of people wanting to sort out their stormwater discharges.
I'm sure you're not.
No. So it'll be self-driven effectively.
For a period of time, but
Yes.
what say people that you feel should have a stormwater protection plan or should be on the risk register, like some of a genre, you know, I don't know, petrol stations or something. Will you go and approach them and say, well, we haven't got your stormwater protection plan? Or,
So the idea is that we would start with the high-risk sites first.
Okay.
And that's certainly part of our consent obligation,
Okay,
is
and
to
then,
identify those sites.
and then I go to well, going back a bit, 6.6. Somewhere in here, we talked about earlier measuring discharge, and you said, well, they're discharged to river, or you measure the stormwater as it goes out. But in here, it talks about discharge from the place. Is that going to be something that will be implemented Oh, no, I don't think it's 6.6. It's got, here we are. The council may require implementation of specific site management.
632.
Yeah, it's sitting here under 6. So everybody would have read it, I'm sure, because we all said we did. And it talked about having an installation, measuring the stormwater as it went off a site. How are you going to organise that?
6.3.1.
Management practices, 6.3.2, from all or part of property. And are you going to have a list of it? This seems quite complicated, like approved contractors and all that sort of thing. You talk about approved contractors to do stuff. Is that only with regards to the stormwater?
Yeah, so, well, we have approved contractors now for doing work on our network or close to our network. In terms of anything that they might have to put in, it's effectively some sort of stormwater management device. And many, applications are being dealt with now where they have to put in some sort of proprietary treatment.
Well, I would think that was my point. I would think that that would be.
So, like at a very minimum, some of these things might be submerged, what they call a submerged outlet sump, to capture hydrocarbons before that gets into the network. But again, depending on the risk, they might have to do more. And there very well could be monitoring done just to find out how risky the site is.
And I wonder if the three, will there be regulations around that under Three Waters, do you think, of the stormwater?
Well, ultimately, and again, the bylaw provides for us to create discharge standards. We're not rushing into that space just yet because we don't know what it looks like. But yeah, I would have thought the new entities will almost certainly have some sort of strict criteria around what they will accept. That's probably bigger than Ben Hur.
Yes, I totally agree. Thank you.
Mr Mayor?
The service stations at the moment, they have forecourts which get rainwater on and it gets collected, and they have a car wash, which some of them. So what happens to those waters from rain on a forecourt and car wash water? At the moment, the service stations, what happens to it?
I think you'll find there'll be hydrocarbon capture pits and specific management of it. To be honest, looking at what the fuel company submission provided in terms of their industry guidance, it looks fairly comprehensive. I mean, if they are following that guidance, we're not going to have problems with fuel companies, I wouldn't have thought.
So what's a hydrocarbon pit? Just describe what that is.
Oh, well, it's effectively just, what it's doing is it's allowing the stormwater from below the water level to discharge, and it's capturing that top level. So it's sort of decanting it, if you like.
So it all eventually ends up in the ground, eventually.
Yeah, well, they've got to manage that. So that material is holding back. They've got to manage that. We take the stormwater.
Right. And the car wash, where does it go?
I think it varies, but most of them go to the sewer, I think.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
Councillor Cameron?
Just one last question. When you have finished your assessment of what is going out, from our stormwaters, your 2 year you have been monitoring, do we get, or whoever the council is, will council get to see that information?
Yeah, certainly that would be reported through the activity briefing or its equivalent going forward.
Thanks.
There would also be a requirement as part of our consent to then establish some stretch targets, reducing that depending on what that baseline tells us.
Thank you.
Councillor Lovett?
Now we talk about managing and monitoring the water. Are we doing any physical testing as well, just to see what the quality is while we're doing all this for future?
Well, yeah, so we're doing our baseline monitoring, so that's happening. Before we even applied for our consent, we did quite a lot of work around working out what the waterways were doing, and also we were taking stormwater, like wet weather event monitoring as well. So we've got a lot of data on that, but the intention around the baseline is just to work out what is our impact on the receiving environment. And in that way, ECAN or the consenting agency can have a look at it and then decide, well, okay, we want you to do X, Y, Z by year 10, say. So they want to see some progressive improvement over time. That's still further discussion though, that's later.
Mr Mayor?
Mr Millicham talks about prohibited substances, it's under 5.5, and he asked for, it's too broad and to be more specific. And does it say anywhere what a prohibited substance is in the bylaw?
Yes, it is defined in the bylaw. Prohibited, I can read it if you wish.
Okay.
Prohibited substance means a contaminant in stormwater but has not been expressly authorised by the council. Prohibited substances include, but are not limited to, sediment, cement, construction byproducts, green waste, litter, detergents, soap, swimming/spa pool water, metal residues, leachate, petrochemicals, pesticides, solvents, substances labelled biodegradable or similar, and any other hazardous substance.
That seems pretty specific.
Yeah.
To me, yeah. Yeah. That's good.
Through you, Mr Chair, could I just pick up on an observation from Councillor Cameron about 5 or 6 questions?
We've got one more question from Councillor Mackay, sorry.
Just following up on the green waste prohibited from the Mayor that you answered. Could I have an indication, please, how council itself will follow and stop that from happening? I asked the question because I bought some photographs and I talked about the green waste being put in the gutter by council employees under council direction. So how is council itself going to set an example? Does anyone know? If you don't know, that's okay. I'll just leave it. I've raised it.
See ya.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Chairman. And just to answer that, I think that discussion at the time, the answer that council received from the manager was that it was unacceptable practice. So I guess the answer to your question is that we will endeavour to stop doing that.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Cameron, about 7 questions back, referred to the risk classification and particular genres of non-industrial sites. Interesting, we have had some really good input from both Christchurch City on their experiences developing their stormwater bylaw, and we've had some very productive interaction with Environment Canterbury in the course of preparing our draft. And what Christchurch are going further with their bylaw than we felt was appropriate for Ashburton. And they've been engaging with non-industrial businesses around risk classification. And one of the strong pieces of feedback from those businesses was you shouldn't assume that one petrol station is typical of all petrol stations, to give an example. So they consciously avoided a risk classification that focused on the type of business and assuming that all businesses of a certain type were high risk. It was actually looking at not only the nature of the business but also how they manage their risks on site. And I can't say we will go with the risk classification work, but I'd like to think we ended up with a similarly common sense approach.
Councillor Rawlinson?
My question, I don't know whether it's appropriate now, is on 5.5, the prohibited substances. The 4th paragraph is where possible vehicles, boats, other equipment should be washed on grassed or shingle surfaces, which a lot of us probably know, but every day you see people washing these things on their sealed driveways, which is feeding into the stormwater. How do you manage to educate the community about that? I mean, is it a massive impact compared to commercial stuff, or I guess it would be when you get a lot of people doing it?
When I was doing my early research on the bylaw and I looked at what kind of things attracted media attention, a lot of people went out with bylaws and the big headline was council bans people washing their cars on their driveways, which caused me to do a little bit of research and discover that we have something like 2,000 sumps in Ashburton District, and the majority of those are in urban areas. So we would need a literal army of sump inspectors if we were going to try and stop car wash detergents running into the roads. So as Councillor Rawlinson alerted, the answer here is in education. Encouraging people to wash their car on their lawn rather than on their driveway. My lawn is very neatly fenced off, so my choice is to wash on my driveway and await the impending arrival of a council sump inspector to lock me up, or to take it to a car wash, or to find a way, maybe with I don't know, sandbags or something, to channel the soapy water into the garden, which is better than having it going into the stormwater network. So we're going to encourage people to do the right thing. We're going to use education, and we're probably going to focus on other issues of non-compliance that are going to be of more impact in terms of achieving our resource consent requirements.
Well, how would you like to break for a cup of tea? And we're not going to get through this whole section before we have a cup of tea. So we'll start again, 9 minutes.
9 minutes.
back again. Righto, Richard, if we continue on with your PowerPoint, please, we can.
Yep. So I'm at slide 8, and this is talking about the section of the bylaw, which is section 8, that deals with proposed rules for earthworks. 2 issues. We had a submission, I think it was from Mr. Collins, who submitted from Mount Somers. The rules were not agreed with. His view was that earthworks should simply be subject to a good plan and competent engineering. And it was the feedback from the fuel companies was that they sought clarity on how clause 8.1.3 would be applied for petrol site earthworks. I learned a lot more about what petrol site earthworks involved as a consequence of this bylaw. And I think my reading of the bylaw is that we can provide some of the assurance that they're seeking, but we may not be able to provide all of it from this end. And my intention would be to have a discussion with Environment Canterbury to provide them with a more complete answer on terms of that question. They weren't seeking an amendment to the bylaw. I didn't see if an amendment was necessary to deal with that. The overall support for the earthworks rules was 43% support, so not the most popular part of the bylaw, but the rules for earthworks are primarily around dealing with land development and controlling silt getting into the stormwater. So it's a silt, you might remember, as part of the definition of prohibited substances. And obviously siltation of waterways is not good for either the waterways or the ecology of them.
I've got a question from Councillor Lovett. If you just speak into your speakers, I think people online are having trouble picking up, because when you talk to Richard, you've got your face away from your speakers. So if you try and speak into your speakers, please. Councillor Lovett.
Yeah, just thinking about this at morning tea. The farming sector is it's getting so regulated with their runoffs and stormwater and things. And we're seeing here the fuel companies, they're highly regulated with what they can do, and they're right up with the mark. And I'm thinking about town. We've got supermarkets, car parks, you've got car yards, we've got workshops, and you get a deluge of rain. Where does all that contaminated water go? Because in car parks we've got brake fluids, brake pad stuff, and spilt other chemicals and stuff. Do they have, is there requirements at the moment for them to contain all their runoff, like petrol station courtyards and things, or does that all run into council, all into our pipe work, and we have to filter it out for them?
Yeah, so effectively we've got legacy sites that will be discharging to the network, and we've up until till now, or to shortly now, we haven't had the tools to regulate that too far. We've, in more recent times, we've required a sort of a minimum level of treatment, and that I mentioned submerged outlet sumps, and there are proprietary devices which will capture hydrocarbons and bits and pieces from hard stand. There's some sites we've required them to put it through a swale for treatment prior to the discharge to our network. The beauty of the bylaw is that it gives us the stick at the end. If they don't, if we get resistance to doing those things, we've got the mechanism to apply what we need.
Because I was just thinking, it's going to create some huge problems with these big developments going on, that maybe they should be, containing their runoffs before it hits our network, like the petrol stations have to comply.
Well, certainly there's a lot of treatment going on already, and there may be further treatment required going forward.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if Andy can answer it or Neil. Jim Collins in Mount Somers He says it's 2 years of systemic failures with stormwater. What has changed in Mount Summers? What is causing that?
I think the submitter was, he was referring to the some flooding issues that occurred in Mount Summers, and the primary issue for Mount Summers was a lot of above township stormwater, land drainage, overland flow arriving into the built-up area. I know the submitter talked about development being the cause. I don't necessarily agree with that, but there's certainly people's natural reaction to seeing development across the road and then having a problem. They have a desire to connect the two things, and it's not necessarily the right.
So this might have been just of all the rainfalls we had last.
They had some significant falls of rain.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Mackay?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm slightly confused. So I learnt from Mr. Guthrie's reply to Councillor Lovett that it's us that looks after the stormwater from those big developments. I thought does ECAN no longer require consents for over a certain amount of parking pavement? Or is it us, the Ashburton District Council? Which is it, the Ashburton District Council or ECAN requires those consent to groundwater from those big paved areas? Stormwater discharge from a paved area, who is it, us or ECAN?
Yeah, so now that we have our own global consent for Ashburton urban area, if they want to discharge to our network, they have to get our approval.
Right.
Prior to the consent, prior to us having a network-wide consent,
yeah,
they had to go to ECAN to get some sort of consent.
So they're attached to our stormwater system now?
Now, yes.
So we're responsible for treating it before it goes into a receiving environment?
Well, effectively, but we're making them do what they need to do on site before we get it.
Thank you. Good. Thank you.
Councillor McMillan?
Thank you. Not a question, just a comment and about the Mount Summers situation. And it was a month or so ago where the Citizens Association organised a meeting up at Mount Summers where Mr McCann, Mr Guthrie, Chrissy, a few others were there. But it was only the Citizens Association, so Mr Collins wasn't. I don't think he's involved, so he may not know that that meeting's gone on, although they have put some information in their local Nor'wester newspaper to sort of tell people what the situation is, but just thought I'd let you know.
Just a comment I'd make. With new subdivisions, is it district consent to put the swales in, or is it ECAN consent to manage the swales that they build?
It's pretty much the same answer I gave Councillor Mackay. So prior to the consent, they would have had to get a discharge consent from Environment Canterbury. The intention under going forward is that they would do those approvals would come via council. I mean, part of the reason why we went to the effort of getting a network-wide consent was to make things slightly easier for developers. But in doing that, we don't necessarily want to take on their liability. We've got to make sure they're doing what they need to do.
Just to comment, any swales that were built prior to this last lot of heavy rain worked really, really well. Lockley and the one over the road from us, they didn't overflow, but they held a big amount of water. So I feel that our amount of area that we make them put in compared to the asphalt seems to work pretty well. Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Stuart. Just about Mount Summers and the submission from Jim Collins, talking about a weir and a gate and a key to it. Is that feasible, giving someone a key? Because obviously council staff have to travel up there or come across from somewhere to do that. Is that a feasible request?
I was looking at Neil for that, to respond to that. It has been posed to the head of Stockwater, because that's the structure they're talking about as a race control, and the answer was no. it wasn't advisable because the key opens a lot of facilities, not just that facility. So,
Councillor Mackay?
May I speak?
Yep. Yes.
Please, councillors, do not go to a key system to unlock a gate for floodwater. It does not work. A classic example is the main 77 highway from Methven to Ashburton at Jessop's corner into Mill Creek. Just put up a system where once it gets so much water, it goes somewhere else. Don't have a key. Don't have a gate. It's human requirements for someone to get out of bed at midnight to go and alter it when they're probably not even in town on a Saturday night. Just forget about it. It doesn't work.
You got something?
Yeah, just following on from that, we are hoping not to require that because we are investigating whether we can work with ECAN and divert the water above the town, and that's something Andy's been investigating. So instead of going down that path, we would rather have an alternative where there's a cut-off drain just above that position. So that would be the ideal solution.
I'll continue on. Richard?
The next section of... Apologies, that's better. The next section of the bylaw relates to proposals for maintenance of private stormwater systems. There were no issues raised in my analysis of the submission on this part of the bylaw. It attracted 72% support.
Only comment I would make, we're residential D, and ECAN required us to put stormwater tanks to collect the water off the roof, but then we've got 25 mil pipes that are allowed to discharge to soak holes. So that's, I think that's more or less a buffer rather than stopping us putting it into groundwater. They'd rather we put it into groundwater than we put it into Mill Creek or something. So that was an ECAN regulation. Mr. Mayor?
Following on from Samantha this morning, Donna, she talked about collecting rainwater, and as they do in Auckland and other places around the country, no doubt. So how can we progress that and use that water which comes off the roofs of the houses and businesses and use it for watering the garden or washing a car or whatever? So as council, how can we progress that? Is it through this bylaw or is it another avenue?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. I think that comes under the category of carrots rather than sticks, so I don't think the bylaw is the place to advance it. But in the course of your deliberations today, you could certainly ask officers to look at ways in which council might want to incentivise rainwater collection in urban or in all areas. That would be the short answer.
Yeah, and the same submitter talked about the ANZ loan, that she did some research on that, and it looks a great idea. Can we look at perhaps promoting that as well, or perhaps other banks do it too, I don't know, but as you say, incentivising people to do it would be a good thing. So if it can come up with some other department to incentivise it, that would be good. Thanks.
Yeah, I think we can look into that and perhaps even publicise that and encourage people to take that up.
Yeah. Councillor Mackay?
Mr. Chairman, council has, I believe, already tried this in making cheaper sections available at Jeff Gearing Drive for people to build houses on, subject to them putting requirements in. Can I strongly suggest that council officers go and have a look at what's happening in Jeff Gearing Drive before they try to impinge anything else on residents of Ashburton? For example, 18 Tarangi Drive would not like to put in a big green tank just for a bit of rainwater. He'd sooner run it across the grass to get treated. Just go careful, because I don't think the extra expense for people to build the houses and that, I don't think is worth it. That's just my opinion. But your example is Jeff Gearing Drive. Go and have a look and find out what's being used. I'd love to know the result. I think I do already.
That's it.
Councillor Brahm.
Yeah, following on from from Angus, it is a carrot. I've seen it in Australia. You can hardly walk past the house because they're pretty close with the neighbours, but you've got a tank there. It basically fills in with water, yes, and if it is full, it goes straight into the lawns. And if it is empty, it's still getting filled by the tap. No, by just flicking through. And you can only use it for toilets, you can only use it for watering the gardens. Really, you need, for a house, you need about a 20 or 30,000 litre tank to be able to do quite a bit during the year. I had I still got it, the 30,000 litre. If I start irrigating, it's only 1 week, if I'm really careful, and then I don't have anything. So it's a real nice idea, but I'm not sure if it's the best idea.
Councillor Mr Mayor.
Yep, I'm not saying that it should be a compulsory thing to do, but it should be optional. And if it's an optional thing, then we could incentivise it to. The rain is a resource, and to just let it soak into the ground unused is a waste. And if people want to use it, and we incentivise them for it, then let them do it.
Councillor McMullen.
I'm going to try this again. I think this was brought up at the Methven Community Board quite a few years ago, and I'm sure we were told it was a district plan issue and that it couldn't be done. I don't know if that's the case or not. Yeah, yeah. But I think we've had examples from Donna with the smaller sort of ones in Auckland, and I agree with the Mayor. I think it needs to be looked at further and as an option, not compulsory.
Councillor Brahm.
Yeah, just to clarify, I'm quite happy with it, but I'm doing it on my own cost. So I'm quite happy to do it at home because I've got a tank. But yeah, you need a decent sized tank to make it worthwhile near a house. But it stops the water, the stormwater going straight into the channels. It stops it for a wee while, and then it will go out.
Yes, I think that size tank in that illustration won't water very much of a vegetable garden. And as Councillor Brahm says, unless you get rain in the next week, you don't need water. No.
It all depends on the size of your section for the size of the facility. Councillor Braham's got 2 hectares or so, which he's got a bit more than that. But most sections aren't that big. It's horses for courses.
Hello, Richard.
And just picking up on the reference to horses for courses, you'll all be aware that Auckland Council draws on the Waikato River for water for its communities, and that they've had some significant issues with dry weather, and so they've had some really strong drivers to encourage people to look at rainwater collection. Again, it's the beauty of local government, eh? So, last section of the bylaw and the second to last section of this presentation dealt with the proposed penalties for breaches of the bylaw. We had a comment from Mr. Millichamp regarding the definition of prohibited substances, that it was broad, and I guess he was inferring that it should be narrowed. The definition is intentionally broad, and it aligns with the definition in our resource consent. There was a submission from the Citizens Association inviting Council to introduce penalties for non-compliant driveway access. I believe this is already covered in 5.1.1 of the bylaw, which prohibits people obstructing the infrastructure. I think the expression is stop, obstruct, alter, interfere with or divert any part of the stormwater network, which we felt would cover a driveway access that was non-compliant and blocked flow of stormwater. As a general rule, penalties are not something that people like to see, so there were 29% support. And going back to my early key messages, a bylaw needs to be fit for purpose. We are designing a stick here, not a carrot. I think this bylaw is fit for purpose in terms of the range of penalties that it provides, because it gives us the opportunity to escalate for repeated non-compliance. So we've got some low-level penalties right through to the potential for prosecution or even excluding someone from our consent. So I think the penalty structure that we've got in the bylaw is fit for purpose.
Councillor Ronson.
Thank you. And just going back to those non-compliant access ways, at what point or how do you find them? If council staff are out driving around and see them, do they report them, or are you relying on neighbours to pot neighbours, or how do you go about it? I mean, there was one there that was metal, and it's obviously even been bolted to the footpath, and you see them. You see people using them to put their boat away after a weekend's boating and stuff like that. So how do you monitor it and control it? Big question, I know.
Well, look.
We'll contact property owners if they've got crossings that aren't compliant or they've never had a permit for and things like that. It needs to be causing an issue. And it's not just having a temporary access for getting your boat and or your motorhome to the back of the property isn't necessarily an issue, but we'd rather have the channels cleared so they're easy to clear. Having said that, we've got lots of covered channels that we've created ourselves that are difficult to clear. And I think individual crossings by themselves don't normally cause too many problems. But it would normally be if during a rain event, if something happens with them, we'll get informed of them, and then the staff will go and check it out and things like that and follow up on it and have any changes made or make them do the crossings correctly. So.
Thanks. Yeah, because you see them all blocked up in the autumn with leaves, and then we have a rain event, and then we've got floodwater.
Yeah, a temporary blockage and having water flow past it and carry on its normal channel isn't really a problem. It's just when it gets diverted onto private property or things like or affecting motors driving past. So if there's a bit of blockage in a channel, then it's not normally an issue. Channel covers, if they get blocked, the water goes past them when they get blocked in a rain event as well. It doesn't normally cause many issues. It's when it does cause an issue that we'll have to follow up on it. So.
Thanks.
Councillor Mackay.
Mr Chairman, the penalties that are in the draft bylaw, do they correspond with the penalties that ECAN will impose on us if we break the conditions of the consent, global consent? Is it in relation to? Okay, I'll be more blunt. If our global consent with ECAN is broken, what are the penalties?
To be honest, I actually don't know the answer to that. They do a lot of work before they start waving a big stick. So they do work with council on non-compliances. And I dare say it would depend on the nature and scope of the non-compliance. Abatement, fines. It could be all manner of things.
So, if ECAN has Mr Chairman, if ECAN has a global consent for us to operate, should our procedures and fines not align with that global consent? Because we obviously are the agent for ECAN's Natural Resources Regional Plan, are we not? Which their consent that they've issued us comes from.
If I may, I think the issue is around scale. So these non-compliances we're talking about here are from an individual property coming into our network. So the scale is a lot less. Once things get scaled up to our discharge and we become non-compliant, that's obviously a different category of non-compliance. And ECAN would use whatever tools they've got to enforce, to make us comply.
So if I follow that through, Mr Chair, does that mean that ratepayers of Ashburton Town, Methven and Rakaia, who look after stormwater in a proper way, would end up paying through their rates a proportion of the fines and abatement notices and or everything we'd have to do to comply with ECAN's global consent to us. Have I got that right?
You could extend that out. Yes.
Council, is that fair? I don't think it is.
Don't seem to get much support there, Councillor Mackay. The Citizens Association were discussing the gutters. I know Mark would replace all the deep gutters if we had enough money. I mean, when we're redoing streets, we are replacing those down Harrison Street, was it? We did one side. So it's be nice to get rid of them all, but we can only do what we can economically do, I think. Mr. Mayor?
So a new gutter formed today will hold less water than one of those deep gutters, would it not? Yep.
Yes, they do. It used to be the old dish channel was the standard thing that was installed everywhere, but the standard cubic channel we put in now can cope with the stormwater we have here. Well, you know, we're not in Auckland, don't get the heavy intensity rainfall, so we don't need to have that. I know some councils even have a lower profile cubic channel that you can actually drive across a lot easier, but we've got a lot of old dish channel here, just as all old townships do. We can replace under drainage renewals, so that's in subsidised rating, so we can get subsidy for it. Often, though, it's not just replacing the curb and channel. There's footpaths. If you've got overhead power, you might underground the power, have as a project as well. So it's one part of a project that we can do. But you can just replace. Walnut Ave was the one that was brought up. That's been looked at previously, and it's been waiting for the promenade and Walnut Ave intersection work and things like that on it. So it'd be certainly nice to do that channel because that's way beyond the end of its life. You can tell that. Just talking with the team, there's issues with that as well. If we put standard profile curb and channel on there, it makes it easier for vehicles to drive across and onto the grass. It happened outside the Croquet Club, I understand, so that's why there's the bollards and the fencing along there now. So there needs to be some coordination with open space as well about what to do with that, and having the funding for it as well. So there's still a bit of discussion on that, but if that's where we want to go and the promenade's not proceeding, and then the Walnut Ave intersection State Highway is completed, then we probably should look at upgrading that frontage of the main. I don't think there's much doubt that the channel's past the end of its life, but there are issues with doing that as well and access into the main. I don't think we want people driving in there.
Yeah, and in a bigger event with the new guttering, Cuban channel, then the road would be used as a holding spot for it as well until it dissipated.
Yeah, it still has the capacity, and you don't have the channel covers and everything else associated with this channel. And I know in the past some disc channels, and there's quite a few around Ashburton that have had the covered on it and then build the carriageway next to it to actually fit out of it. That means you're just covering an old channel that's already 40, 50 years old, and it's very difficult to clean. There's not much capacity underneath as well, and the channel covers break as well. You witness outside the even the council building, there's always broken channel because vehicles can drive on it easier, so they break the concretes on top. So there are lots of issues with that. Ideally, replacing the old disc channel with a new standard cubic channel is the way to go, but it's not just replacing the channel. There's other work with the carriageway in front of it and all sorts of things as well.
Councillor Lovett.
I'm just going to follow on from Angus. The breaches of the bylaw are private and business treated the same on breaches and payment, or is there two different levels? Because like private would be more minor things than a business, or just thinking a recovery cost and to apply.
I think the broad answer to your question is that we would treat any party who'd committed an alleged breach of the bylaw in a consistent way, regardless of whether they were a private citizen or a business. It could well be, though, that if remedial work was required, that might be more expensive for a business because of the nature of the discharge or the nature of their site. So it's not an easy question to give you a short answer to, but broadly speaking, we'd look to treat everyone equally, but the cost of solutions might vary, and we would look for the property owner to meet the cost of those solutions.
Yeah, I can see where they're coming from. Perhaps businesses should be paying more recovery there must be a scale there, because I don't think the ratepayer should be topping, be the cost of it all.
I don't recollect exactly how we fund stormwater at the moment. Some of you with better memories of the Council's revenue and financing policy probably know this instinctively, but we're not proposing any different or additional source of funding for the implementation of the bylaw at this stage. One of the options that we did talk about before the draft was adopted for consultation was to bring in some kind of licensing system which provides an additional revenue stream. But we're in a little bit of an information void in terms of what our local stormwater issues are, to know what level of licence fee and who it should be levied upon is appropriate. And at the time, I also recall Mayor Brown commented that you've had some previous experience with other forms of licensing and it wasn't necessarily a positive experience. So you've had that political feedback as well. So I think Councillor Mackay makes a completely relevant and fair point about it's not ideal way of funding, dealing with people who are non-compliant, but I'm not sure that we've got too many better options at this point.
Okay.
I think Tony may know, stormwater collection would be a targeted rate, would it not, for Ashburton requirement? I know Hines has a targeted rate for just a few dollars.
Through the chair, I don't know for sure off the top of my head, but it feels right that it would be a targeted rate based on the community it corresponds to. Would you like me to look that up? Do you need to know? Yep. Oh, hold the line.
Councillor Latham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In my opinion, the level of penalty for breaches of the bylaw should be commensurate with the level of the breach, irrespective of who the landowner or the ratepayer is.
Have we got a list, Richard, or how do we actually work the penalties?
The penalty provisions are spelled out in the bylaw. So it starts with, we identify that there's a breach of the bylaw and council serves a defect notice, which basically requires the property owner to fix the defect, to remedy it. Council can charge a re-inspection fee if they don't deal with the defect. Council can for certain reasons take immediate steps to remedy, or after the elapsing of time decide to carry out the remedial works and recover those costs from the property owner. The next step up, or the next step that's referred to in the bylaw, is the suspension or cancellation of approval to discharge. So this is where we would say, because of serious issues with a particular property, that we are not prepared to allow you to continue to discharge into our stormwater system because you're placing our resource consent at risk. You have to get your own resource consent from Environment Canterbury. That's in some respects the most serious penalty we've got in the bylaw, because the costs of obtaining for an individual property owner a resource consent can be quite substantial. On top of that, there are two other remedies, and they both involve the court. One is to take out an injunction, which effectively is a requirement enforced by the court to stop doing something, and the final is prosecution. Both of those are quite serious responses. Both of them are fairly expensive to do. Neither of them are what I would call cost recovery type activities, but sometimes you have to show that you're willing to go the ultimate distance to stand up for your bylaw.
It would actually be a bit difficult to stop a private owner when it rains. How is he going to keep stormwater on the property once his lawn got flooded or something? It would be, how would we, be difficult to enforce, wouldn't it?
If we wanted to exclude someone from our stormwater system, how do we do that in practical sense? That is very challenging, absolutely.
Oh, Tony?
Thank you. Through the chair, just going back to that revenue and financing policy question. So it's split. There's 90% of the stormwater costs are levied on a targeted capital value rate for those properties that are in the catchment of a council stormwater. So that's Ashburton, Methven and Rakaia. And 10% is actually funded from the general rate, given that for the justification, there's a community-wide benefit through the protection of assets such as roads and by enabling safe transit within the scheme during rainfall events.
Thanks, Tony. Is there a rural stormwater rate too?
No, just captured through that 10%. They're just captured through that general rate of that 10% cost.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, Richard, next.
So the last section of the bylaw I'm taking it at the same time as the other comments section of the feedback. And so this captures the very early parts of the bylaw, the purpose, objectives, the definitions and so on. The issues that came through in the submissions were inviting us to put more emphasis on grey water systems and rainwater collection, which we've previously discussed. Mr. Collins has commented on the stormwater issues at Mount Somers that we've already discussed. There was reference to grey water systems per the work at Jeff Gearing Drive, and we've also discussed the issue of deep dish channels. The very day I received that submission from the Citizens Association about the deep dish channel and the person who'd come off their mobility scooter, I was walking across the road to a bakery on Creek Road, and I think it's the power of suggestion. I had my phone in front of me, and there was a vehicle crossing here and a vehicle crossing here, and just a short bit of raised curb. And what did I do? Caught the curb and very nearly did a faceplant on the very good piece of council footpath, actually, just on the back. So it's not only for old folk and mobility scooters who are at risk from moments in attention, even old folk that can walk and get caught.
Mr. Mayor, you got a question?
Oh, sort of a comment really. The deep dish channels, some of them are covered as are in the CBD, and when you're replacing them with curb and channel, the newer curb and channel, those lids, could they be moved to a place where there's open channel and is an interim measure until their turn comes up for replacement, reusing those lids on open channel elsewhere?
The answer is you could, as long as they're still fit for purpose, not get broken during the demolition and all that sort of thing. So yes, they could be.
They're just sitting on there, I think, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
If they're manhandled properly, something to consider.
Yeah. If we want to go down the path of covering old dish channels, so if we're going to spend the money doing that, my preference would be we actually replace the old dish channel. Yeah. But
it might be an interim measure until you get to it.
Yeah, if you're just putting a cover on the dish channel, though, you still have to do work in front of it, because otherwise you got the lip of the channel of the cover that's going there. So you have to build up the carriageway in front anyway. So there's actually quite a bit of work involved.
Okay. I just thought you might put it on, but that's fine. Good comment. Yep.
Councillor's got any comment about collecting grey water?
Mr. Chairman, as there are no further questions or comments, we're at the point where we're looking for a wrap-up resolution or two. I had a bullet here referring to an amendment on slide 7, that was 7.2.2, and we recanted our advice, and you seem to agree that we should recant that advice. We haven't identified any other amendments at this point. If you, and you have had quite a good discussion about looking into options to incentivise rainwater collection. If if you want us to do some work, we can go away and do some work. A resolution might help provide some clarity around that. So if you wanted to give us a resolution on that, we'd be keen to take it. I haven't drafted anything myself. Following that conversation, if it takes place, we do have a recommendation, as per on the slide, that council directs officers to make the agreed amendments, if there are any, to the draft Stormwater Bylaw and present the bylaw for formal adoption on the 5th of October.
Of course, we make a recommendation. We can't actually pass a motion at a workshop, so. Yes.
My understanding is you're not in a workshop. My understanding is you're in a meeting.
Hearing and can do. Councillor Brahm, you got it.
Yeah, just a comment and a question a wee bit. So, for Andy, you're quite happy with what we've got. Apparently, we're not changing anything. So this is not broken. We don't have to fix it.
I'm thinking back to the amount of work that we put into developing it, and one of the things I've noticed is that when you look at it too many times, you start going back on yourself.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm comfortable with what you've already seen. So.
Thank you for that.
Do we need to incorporate the recommendation or the laws that petroleum industry has got in our bylaw? Or do we, because they've obviously got regulations. I was talking to Richard that some councils use that as part of their stormwater strategy, that 140 pages of stuff.
I'm not inclined to go there. The guidelines were developed by the Ministry for the Environment in partnership with the fuel industry. It seems to be guidance that's well accepted within the industry. I can't speak for Andy's expertise, but I don't know enough about the fuel industry to vouch for the guidelines. I'm just prepared to trust that the people who work in that industry and the people at MFE who have done the work with them have made good judgments. One of the things that I did note, and this was in conversation with the chair, is it's through the submission from the fuel companies, they make reference to the fact that the guidelines have been widely adopted throughout the country by many regional councils, and they made a number of specific references to Auckland. They haven't made any specific reference to Canterbury, and my suspicion is that in Canterbury we do it a little bit different to Auckland, and that if the regional council was 100% supportive of everything that the fuel companies were doing with their guidelines, they would have been happy to tell us that. I think the fact that they haven't said that means there might be some marginal points of difference. So I wouldn't make specific reference in our bylaw to the guidelines. My suspicion is that they're quite widely followed. I imagine the oil companies, they replicate known good practice wherever they establish a new site. So no, I wouldn't recommend that, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Mackay.
I believe the officer's got it right, but after his comment, I have the question to him, and the question is, for how long has the Canterbury Regional Council followed the Auckland stormwater regulations that were drawn up many years ago and followed by other regional councils around New Zealand? Are they still being used by the Canterbury Regional Council, which would fit that the fuel companies, when they go for a consent in Auckland, have to abide by those, and the fuel companies in Canterbury would have to abide by those as well? Would you like to comment? I'm asking the question because I believe they still follow those Auckland guidelines from many, many years ago, and they haven't actually changed. Have I got that right or wrong?
I simply don't know the answer.
Hello, councillors. Do you want to proceed with the suggestion of Councillor Brown?
Yeah, if I can. I hear what Richard is saying, and I think it's a good idea. We are making this bylaw, not the petrol companies. What they do is what they do. This is what we do.
Councillor McMillan?
So can we make a recommendation that council officers investigate the water tanks? Is that what?
You mean grey water
storage?
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Do you want to make
storage.
that part of the bylaw or?
No.
No.
But just an investigate, separate.
To direct staff to.
Yeah, to investigate.
Councillor Latham?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's keep stormwater to stormwater. I agree with the recommendation on the slide. I think the staff have done a very good presentation, and I think the petrol companies have got their act pretty well together. I read it right through, and there's nothing there that I think would cause us any major worry. So keep stormwater to stormwater bylaw, and we can talk about grey water and conserving rainwater and all that sort of thing at some other time under some other heading.
And you're all quite happy with, after you heard the submissions, you didn't want to make any major changes after hearing the submissions? Well, would somebody like to move that motion up there that would, with the amendments, it'll become to the full council next Wednesday? You
I'm happy to move that.
second it? Lane? Any further comments?
I had my name down.
Oh.
I had my name down on that. I was going to move that, but I'd like to, alongside this bylaw, is look at the grey water systems, because if it will get lost in the system and won't come back up, I think it needs to give the officers permission to have a look at that and bring it back to council in the future. If we don't do it now, it'll just get thrown out and we won't see it again.
Rainwater and rainwater.
Yeah, the grey water and rainwater, and yeah, have a look at it.
Can I just get clarification? What are you looking for? Because what other councils have done is they've provided incentives and costs. They haven't charged costs for resource consents, for example. Do you want us to look at something like that, or where council can offer some sort of benefit for going down that path? Is that what you're looking for? Okay. Because, I mean, we can certainly look into all the information and provide that on our website with links as to what tanks can be used and the benefits and all the information. But in terms of looking into, you want a cost analysis and a proposal how council could assist financially with promoting. Is that what you want or not?
Hamish?
I wonder whether the step towards what Mr. McCann is proposing is to actually perhaps do a snapshot of what other councils are doing to incentivise. So I think the information that Neil talks about on our website we can just easily do. But in terms of if council is going to incentivise or there's financial cost in that, perhaps the starting point is to understand what others are doing and what that cost looks like, and then try and gauge in a more formal way council's appetite for making some sort of investment in whatever incentive looks the best.
At this stage we're actually discussing the motion. Councillor Mackay.
As the stormwater set out in the proposed bylaw, yes, I agree with that. Are you saying I can't comment about something else that's been mentioned in the debate?
No, you're right.
I can go. Mr. Chairman, I plead with councillors not to instruct the staff to do anything in creating something new What I would like a council to see is a report on last time the Ashburton District Council offered an incentive through the sale of cheaper sections, and to look today, some years on, what has actually happened with that incentive idea, that carrot. I believe I know the answer, but I haven't gone along and asked everyone on the street what's actually going on. But I believe I know the answer, and the answer is not good. The incentive offered was really a waste of money, and it's up to everyone, if they wish to be environmentally more friendly than their neighbour, to put the tanks in and do this and that. But for council to incentivise it, we've already tried it as a council many, many years ago, even before I was involved in this council. There's great screeds in the newspaper about Jeff Gearing Drive. Council doing this and council doing that. Is the incentive being followed today? I don't believe so. But if council staff could just take a drive along or a walk along and find out, you get your answer. Please don't do what Councillor Lovers has asked for. It's a waste of time.
Mr. Mayor? Oh.
Right.
No,
okay, thanks. Jeff Gearing Drive was mandatory. It was covenanted to go on those sections, so you had no choice but to put in the system. You had to have solar on the roof, you had to collect some rainwater, and I think the berm out the front was a permeable or something like that. It was mandatory. We're not talking here mandatory. What I'd like to see it is we enable it, we promote it, and could incentivise it. That would be what the report is around. And it may be, some of it might be putting on the building consent, or even going back to the architects to get the thinking going, because it needs to start back at when your house is being designed, to get the slope right, to get the water into one or two either side of the house, gutter points to collect it. So it's just promoting. Enable, promote and incentivise is all we need to do, I think.
Do you want to make it part of the...
Oh, no, definitely not part of the bylaw. Yep. Something separate, completely separate. But when it comes to council on next Wednesday, there might be a separate resolution that we instruct the staff to do just that, enable, prioritise, incentivise, and that might be looking at what other councils do and how can we promote that as well, or incentivise. And the ANZ bank one is one of those things.
Councillor Latham, right of reply?
Yeah, I'm going to use this as my right of reply, just to wind the conversation up. The suggestion that we should look into grey water because it'll get missed and it won't come back again. What's the problem with grey water? If there's no problem with it, don't fix it. Is there any problem with grey water? No. So leave it alone. Stick to this. This is what we've done. I'm very, very happy with it. And yes, that's where it is.
I shall put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Carried. Thank you. Against? No, carried unanimously. Thank you, Richard and Andy. Is there anything further?
I have one further slide, Mr. Chairman. We will not amend based on today's feedback. There will be a debate to adopt the bylaw on the 5th of October, and the very, very last slide. Thank you for your time and attention, and it's been a pleasure to present this discussion under your chairmanship, Councillor Wilson.
I'll switch rule.